I always try to learn and get new information. I heard a podcast about land flipping and I asked him about it. And it was something that he didn't seem to have as much interest. So I approached my wife and I said, let's try to keep this income within the family and do it together. And she had an incredible sales background. So we started this business together in that September, October timeframe, right as Action Academy was starting up. And I reached out and I got involved in other groups that were doing land flipping right off the bat.
Welcome back to the Art of Connecting podcast. This is your host here, Hayden Fike. And I just got corrected for the first time. I've been talking to this man for the whole year. We've been in a pod together, and I've been saying his last name wrong this whole entire time. This is Brian Desmaries here. And where are you from again? I can't remember. You're in...
I live in Pennsylvania, about an hour northwest of Philadelphia.
All right. He's coming to us all the way from Pennsylvania. And I'm here in Chattanooga as usual. And I wanted to have Brian on the podcast because I've known Brian for multiple months now, which is funny because when you're an entrepreneur, like 6 months feels like it's been 12 years. We were in a pod together in the Action Academy. And basically, what a pod is, you keep each other accountable, you go through what your goals are. And I watched Brian go from, hey, I think I'm going to try this land flipping thing. Or I think it was like, I've started this thing and it's small, but we'll see if it can get big. And now I've watched him basically explode and be like the person in what he does. So we'll get into what he does, why it's cool, and why I'm having him on the podcast. But really, I wanted to ask Brian the whole story. Like, how did the connections lead you to where you are? Of course, since we're on the art of connecting, and talk about how other people, mentors, and masterminds and things like that have gotten him to where he is today. So with all that being said, let's get started and let's hear who is Brian Desmaries.
Yeah, thanks, Hayden. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, we've known each other probably since I joined Action Academy, I think in September, October timeframe. And we were linked up right away in our pod and then went to Cabo together and got a lot of one-on-one time just speaking and learning each other's story from there. But he doesn't really understand where I came from. For me, I started out in the military. So I was in the military from 19 to 23. I did 4 years in the military and then jumped right in, used my GI Bill to get my undergraduate degree in economics. And then from there, went into a banking role and was like an underwriter, did commercial loans. So I learned a lot about kind of multifamily underwriting throughout my kind of 10 years or so in banking. And that was pretty interesting and it propelled my skill set to where I am today. And it was a great thing that I have in my kind of tool belt to use in the future. And I'll be using some of those profits that I get from land flipping and parlaying that into an asset such as that. But so going back to where I was, so college in Westchester University in Pennsylvania, and then met my wife there. And then we moved here to the Lehigh Valley area. But during that time period, mentors weren't really a big part of my life, kind of going through my kind of day-to-day job. But then I took a position in another company that did hard money lending. So I saw these people flipping houses and wholesaling houses and being a part of those transactions, going out to the properties, inspecting them, watching the work get done, taking photos and recommending draw requests and stuff like that. So it really had a kind of hand-on experience. And while I was working, I was doing a few flips on the side and realizing, and then COVID hit. So my first flip was it was wrapping up in February, March of 2020. So I was like, oh my God, I made this big transition in my life, or this is what I want to be doing in the future. And then now I can't sell my house. Nobody can walk in my house to look at it. But during that time period, I was going to my local meetups, meeting other investors, very heavily involved in the local real estate market that I'm in now. And just talking to other investors, created a kind of a little mentorship program within a small group of other investors. And then I still work with this younger guy now that comes to me for contractors and other pieces of advice, and sometimes partnering opportunities, and then work with a few wholesalers in the area, but really want to be focusing on land flipping now. But during that time period, watching these people flip these houses and doing that on the side, that I knew that's where I wanted to be and more focused in real estate. My wife and I already had a rental at that time. So we've been through a full renovation and now are starting to do more rapid get in and out of these things in a quick fashion. doing that on the side. And then I was furloughed from my job due to COVID because we were a hard money lender at the time and everything ceased. So that was in, I believe, May of 2020. And then it was a blessing in disguise, honestly, because my daughter was born in July. So I would have only had 1 week to spend with my wife, who was going to be off for her 3 months of maternity leave. I had no paternity options to stay home and help out. And so it was a really interesting time period. And I remember getting the call, and I was just talking to my wife about it today while I was in the truck with my business partner at the time, who was helping me flip some properties. And there was no anxiety whatsoever. It was a relief, honestly, that I could pursue this and see if I could make it work. My wife still had a really stable job. So I was really excited to take that full steam. So I had a partner with him, and we still work together on other projects, and we have a small rental portfolio together. But then I always trying to learn and get new information. I heard a podcast about land flipping, and I asked him about it. And it was something that he didn't seem to have as much interest. So I approached my wife and I said, let's try to keep this income within the family and do it together. And she had an incredible sales background. So, we started this business together in that September, October timeframe, right as Action Academy was starting up. And I reached out and I got involved in other groups that were doing land flipping right off the bat. And I found this guy, Mike Balcom, who had this free weekly kind of meetup, and just created a synergy with him and reached out to him directly and asked him if he would mentor me. And he created a mentorship program around what land flipping is for us today. And we do outbound texting, and that's what he was doing. I was really interested in that type of marketing. So that's how we got started. And somebody that we still work with today, and actually scheduling a call with him this week to fine tune our processes and as we build and grow our business.
That's amazing. So let's see. I want to talk about your time in banking. So you alluded to it, but I'm a huge fan of the thought process that every experience you have, every job you have, every road that comes to an end is preparing you for the next journey, right? And you had mentioned using what you learned in banking, it was helpful. What are some of those lessons that you learned while you were in banking that have been helpful to you today?
I was actually in the SBA department, understanding how those businesses work and how to underwrite those businesses and have those high level corporate meetings. So that was my first introduction to real life working in the Army. It's you're following leadership and involved in any meeting. So that was just like first introduction to corporate world. But then understanding how the ins and outs, truly diving into every single line item within a P&L and balance sheet of a small business was very interesting, and something I can still use today as a part of my skill set. And then also from there, I transitioned into more of a multifamily underwriting role into a different bank. And that's where I really got to see the ins and outs of how an asset like that operates. And then I became a portfolio manager within the bank. So then I was boots on the ground and seeing in person what the apartments look like, what the units look like, what common areas were, common area maintenance, all the things that go into running a property. So that was pretty interesting for me as well. So taking all those together, how to underwrite those, and then parlaying that into some of my single family purchases that I'm doing today and how to underwrite those at a one-off level. And then using that hopefully in the future for my portfolio going forward.
That's awesome. So it essentially was training, like you were wearing training gear, like you didn't have any of the risk to learn all this stuff. You were just financing it, but you started learning how all the back end operates. That's super cool. And so let's talk about that first flip, man. So this was during COVID. I can only imagine how stressful it must be as someone who is in $500,000 of short term debt himself with two flips. What did that look like when you're doing this flip? Were you scared? Did you feel confident that it was going to move? Let's talk about that flip.
Yeah. So the first flip I bought on market. So it's my only property I've ever bought off the MLS. It was at a time where you could do that, I feel. And I'm sure I knew a lot of people have that business model today for this local market. It's just so competitive. And so I found something on market. I had my license at the time and made an offer on that. It was a bank owned property. So I was able to work with an agent on market, take the property down. I think we bought it for $92,000, and I estimated it need about 60K in renovation. So I found a local contractor by speaking to some of my neighbors. I know my neighbor had some work done and he really recommended this guy. So reached out to him, went through a couple other contractors that were giving me a little bit different numbers or whatnot, but I had just enough experience by seeing these things happening in that third position I took as being a part of those flips as a hard money lender. So I just went after it. I went on the market. I took it down and I went through the process. Everything that probably could go wrong, as you probably hear on your first flip or your first couple of flips or most flips in general, did go wrong. We had to replumb the entire property. The house had no insulation whatsoever. So as we started opening up walls, it was built in the early 1900s when they didn't have insulation, or they used newspaper at one point. But this house had nothing, so we had to blow in and cut holes throughout every cavity in the house and blow in insulation. So it was an interesting project. But yeah, started it in probably November of 2019 and was done in about March. So it took a couple extra months. Everything took longer than I expected, like usual. And then went to put it on the market. And then the entire real estate market closed down. You couldn't enter a house. We were shut down for 1 month with nobody could show the property. So I had this hard money loan at probably 12.5%, 13% that I found from a local investor that was able to buy in on just my minor experience at that point and didn't need a partner, which was pretty cool, but I was able to do it by myself. And then probably sold it in probably early May by the time we finally closed. So it was a process.
Did you make money on that?
Barely. Probably made about $15,000. But for me, it was a proof of concept. It was a really interesting thing to go through. And I knew I could get through one, and I already had another one kind of lined up. So it was just like, okay, here we go. We're off to the races.
That's a win if you make 15 grand on a flip, like on
Yeah.
the first one. That's awesome. And so what you mentioned your connection with the contractor, and with the lender. So let's talk about, how did you meet that lender? Because it's a question I get a lot. I'm actually doing a course around this. But how do you get private money? What did that relationship look like? And how did you get money without having any flip experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my office and the work that I did was based out of New Jersey. So I had heard about this lender, and I had found one of the guys that we were working with in my previous job had recommended me to them. And it was just building that relationship with them, proving that I had enough personal assets, that I had minor experience. I've seen things happen, but I haven't done it myself. So then we had to vet a really good contractor, have their insurance and all the things on the line. And they just it was at a time where things were a little bit more looser, I think. So I was lucky to get my foot in the door that way. And then once you get your first experience, and if it's not available to you, I think then you partner up with somebody with a few flips under their belt, and that can really get your foot in the door. And then as far as a contractor goes, that was just word of mouth. I tried a few other contractors out, had them in for bids. Some didn't get back to me. Tried everything I could by just simple Google, Craigslist, all the things that you try to find a decent contractor and vet them the best you can with the amount of experience I had. And then I went to my neighbor who had a garage built at the time by this gentleman. And so a decent amount of work, a big renovation, and worked with him. And that was just created that bond right off the bat. He was very straightforward and open about what he was going to do and the timeline. And he was very hard worker. He worked on Saturdays on the flip. So I was very happy and fortunate to have him on my first flip, guiding me through the process. But you hear a lot of horror stories out there with people picking that first contractor and maybe having to switch midway through the job. So I was very lucky with that.
All right, let's go ahead and get into land flipping, because I know this is your zone of genius. Have you been on another podcast yet about land
I've not. This is my first podcast about in general. Yeah.
I thought you'd been on the Apke Brothers,
No.
but maybe not. So we need to make that happen for you. Let's talk about land flipping. What you mentioned, your connection with Mike. What did that look like? You listened to a podcast, and then what happened from there?
I listened to my first podcast, and then they started talking about seller financing with land, which I thought was very interesting, which I just knew enough about with houses, but of course, no opportunities unless you have the house paid down or paid off at that point. So once I started hearing those kind of terms where I could sell or finance a piece of land to somebody and create like a note revenue situation for myself, I thought that was very unique. And then land flipping in general, where you don't really have to go in and deal with the plumbing and the electrical and all the things that go into opening cavities and walls and finding no insulation. All the things that kind of go into a house flip aren't really there. You definitely have some due diligence and some items you should look into on every piece of land. And land definitely has its nuances. It's not as cut and dry as buying something and selling it for a profit. But I heard that podcast, got really interested, and then I went down a deep dive into land investing and actually knew from another conversation with another gentleman. I was a part of Ryan Pineda's mastermind group, and there was a guy in one of my pod kind of situations who was doing some land flipping. So I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, how's this going for you?" And when I first heard him talking about it, I was like, this doesn't seem like this could work. Who really buys land?" So once I went further down that path, spoke to him, and then heard about his kind of weekly meetups with Mike. He was friends with Mike, got into that group, and then just dived in full steam and then approached Mike about a mentorship opportunity.
And what did that conversation look like when you approached Mike about a mentorship opportunity?
Yeah, it was. So we were doing these weekly calls and it was very kind of surface level and it was very interesting and very good for my initial learning experience. But learning from Mike and his knowledge base and where he was at only in a few short years and the type of marketing he was doing, that was key to me was I wanted to mimic the marketing that he was doing. I wanted that text messaging. I wanted that initial response to come in and I wanted that real time response to go back out to them and getting them on the phone right away. Nothing against mailers, but that lag time between a few weeks, 3 weeks before you get communication with those people wasn't really feeling the type of marketing that I was trying to do. So once I realized Mike was doing that and learning from him directly, I just approached him. I said, "Hey, do you have time for a call?" We set up some time. I had my wife on the call so we could all learn from each other and see if he had any interest in that. And then we created a proposal and a contract in the back end and we were off to the races. And we probably had about 6 weeks of calls together, really diving into all the information that we would need to get started. And he laid it all out for us. It was very generous and a very great opportunity for us, and then handed off the reins to us to go from there. And we still schedule calls and stay in good contact today, but now we're really self-sufficient.
I think that's a perfect example of seeing a mentor and then just pursuing it. Because people ask me too, I'm looking for a mentor, people that are getting started or they're interested in learning about an industry. It doesn't even have to be real estate. And so how do I find my mentor? And it's who do you look up to? Like, what podcasts do you listen to and you hear someone talking and that's what you listen to, right? Reach out to that person. You you never know if that person is gonna be open to talking to you. They may already have a mentorship program. They may have never done it before, but they want to, and they've just never had anyone ask. And so I think that's super cool that you saw that he could potentially help you and didn't just go, "Oh, that's cool." You you went and you called him and you said, "Hey, I want this." And it sounds like you created a program.
Yeah, he had never done anything like this before. So it was a completely a first time for him, and he created it for us specifically. And I think he's working with other people now based on the first go around. And that's how I got started in Action Academy too. Interesting, the same way is I heard Brian Lubin on a podcast with the Apke brothers. So they were talking about land, and Brian was talking about Action Academy, and I reached out. I was really understanding what Brian was saying and realized that I needed that as part of my life. So I reached out to Brian on Instagram and I said, "Really love your podcast with the Apke brothers. I'm just getting started in land." And then we started out, we set up a call with me and learned where I was at and decided we'd be a good fit for each other to be in Action Academy. But what Brian was saying, and he was going along those same lines as far as mentorship going, saying that it makes sense to get that mentor now versus waiting 2 years when you think you're ready to get to that 2 year mark much quicker.
Mm.
So once I heard some of those things, and I know I needed to be around other like-minded individuals that are doing real estate, because my group here is friends and family and those kind of things, but they're not really doing the same things I was doing. So that's where Action Academy for me was born. And speaking to Luke, Brian right off the bat cemented that. And that's where I started my journey with Action Academy as well.
So I think that's a great segue to talk about community and connection through community. So what does it look like as far as it sounds like you're in a few different communities. How helpful have those been to you to your success?
Instrumental. I couldn't put it in really in words other than instrumental, meaning that it going into Action Academy, talking about our micro tribe where we have 20, 30 people in there doing land, and we're always discussing different opportunities. People are posting things that give you ideas, spark interest, as well as our pod right now, as you spoke about and describe what that is centered around 4 individuals, myself included, that are all in land. So pod 10, I have to give a minor shout out to them. But that being said, we're all in land, we're all learning from each other, and we're all giving each other ideas. And every step that one person takes, another one seems to follow very shortly after. So if I have an idea, I throw it into the chat, and now we're all hiring transaction coordinators together. And that was based off of Mike actually coming on to our microtribe call a few weeks ago. So without having those individuals to push each other and learn from each other, I don't think I would be where I'm at today. I think we would still be sending a baseline amount of text messages and fuddling through it. But as we learn from each other and hiring VAs and all the things that go into really creating a business, it would not be present in my life.
In true professional connector fashion, there's someone that I want to connect you to that runs the largest transaction coordinating company in the country. I wrote that down, so I'm gonna connect you to him.
Cool. That'd be awesome.
Be pretty cool. He's based here in Chattanooga. But yes, like the having the pod has it's changed my life too. I can only imagine what your land pod is. I don't usually talk about money. I told you this in the beginning, but I do want to talk about like last week because it was mind blowing. I think everybody's like thinking about like, should I get into land flipping? I'm sure they saw that. Like your pod together has done what? Like in last week, you generated deals that are projected to do 1 million in profit, something like that.
Yeah, between what we have under contract and what we have in inventory, it was pretty high. I don't have the numbers in front of me. If you were able to pull up on Facebook, you could quote it, but I think it was around 800,000 in inventory. So things that are projected to sell for that number. And then other guys in the pod had a significant amount of properties under contract that we're working towards closing. So more of on a realized profit standpoint.
Yeah, yeah. But even still, if you cut that in half and divide that by 4, oh, it's pretty significant. It's very significant, actually, especially for a week. So,
It's a 1 week's time frame, 7 days. We look back 7 days from our previous pod meeting to then.
do you think that being in this pod and being in this group is going to create partnerships, or has it already created partnerships through like the connections that you've made?
Yeah, really interesting question because yeah, we're talking about that and it definitely will probably develop in partnering on deals. I know one of the guys in the group has some IRA funds that he wants to contribute to a deal and just start increasing the rate of return on that versus what he's getting as a retirement fund. But also we're talking about creating a fund amongst each other between the 4 of us, combining our experience and then creating a fund which we can lend out of to buy properties and then create a return for outside investors. That's something we're working on in the background. And I think we're actually all meeting up together in August. So that'll be really neat. I've met Jake in person, but never met Dylan and Landon in person. And so we're all going to go to Cape Cod in early August and we're going to go to a library with a whiteboard and just really dive into each other's businesses for about an hour a piece and just say everything that's happening and then everybody will have feedback within that. So that'll be a really cool time period for us to not only get to know each other, we're going to spend time just talking about our history and where we came from and where we are today, our family life and everything like that. So we can really get together. And then we'll probably go into the business aspect of things and do maybe a whale watching event, something like a little bit more bonding, but that's going to be something that not a lot of pods are doing. And we're excited to do that and meet in person. And then we'll be in Tulum together as well. What's that, in September? So
Mhm.
we'll have even more time to strengthen that bond.
Brian Cole sent me a text the other day. He's like, I booked my flight and it said 76 days. And I was like,
It's coming right around the corner.
there's 76 days or
That's
probably
going to be awesome.
74 days away now. And I'm so excited. That's amazing though. I think it's really interesting to be able to do a podcast because like future casting, just thinking like closing my eyes and thinking about like you guys being in that room together and what is going to be created out of that. I think it's gonna be insane. Like to look back and think about we joined this little mastermind group and we paid whatever $5,000-7,000 a year for it, and then it led into this. And I think it truly is gonna be like gonna be like a bigger pockets. It's gonna be like something that's really big that you guys accomplished together, just because of how much momentum you have and how early you are in the process. So that's awesome. Let's see. So I want to talk about how do you finance the land now? Like, I want to hit on this again, and this isn't a money podcast, but I think finance and connections go hand in hand because if you're using someone else's money, a lot of times there's some form of connection there. And I know a little bit about your situation, so maybe you can speak to other people how they're financing it too. But
Sure.
in general, how does financing land flipping work?
Yeah. So in the beginning, you bootstrap and you want to get a proof of concepts. You want to use your own money to make sure this is something that's feasible. I think that's important for other land flippers to do is do one on your own or use a funder. So they have other kind of outside funding sources where typically that's like a 50%. They take 50% of profits, but they fund the entire deal. So that's another way if you don't have the money off the bat to do your first land flip. So they'll run the entire show and hopefully you can keep yourself involved in that process or make yourself involved in that process, working with the realtors, doing some of the due diligence, helping list the property. But at this point, and then for looking for those outside connections, I've used funders on 4 of my deals today. So 2 of them have been family and 2 of them have been Action Academy members. And that's just closing the deal, talking about returns and creating a partnership in the back or recording a mortgage on the property. And then other land investors are doing similar things, especially within my pod, where you're either working with other Action Academy members or family members and just telling our story and then showing them kind of proof of concept and how that's worked and other deals where they are today. Not everyone goes smoothly. So you have to start out with that, like anything in real estate. Some take longer to sell, and maybe the realtor working on the property isn't the greatest at the end of the day. You learn from those first 6 months, 7, 8 months that you're in to find that right realtor and then explain everything you can to the funder and kind of outline the risks and the rewards that come with that.
That's awesome. And so really you've funded all 4 of these just through your connections. It's like it's not you going to a company, it's not, "Oh, hey, I have this track record." You wanted to create that track record, but you really only had 1 to 2 deals, right, when you started
Correct.
going to funders. And I remember watching, I think it was Dylan that did his presentation on the land deal that he had. We did a Shark Tank in Action Academy where you pitch your deal. And his pitch was insane. Like, he did such a good job putting it together, and there were 4 people that were like, "I wanna do it."
Oh yeah.
Right there, like, in the messages, like, "I want."
Yeah.
And when the guy that was running the call was like, "I might fund it. I don't know." And so I think that's really fascinating to think about how if you just put yourself in the right room and you have the right opportunity, you may have somebody to fund your project sitting beside you.
Yeah, I've got a call scheduled for tomorrow with a potential funder, somebody that just sees. Another thing with an Action Academy is we post our onesie wins. So we open ourselves up to things that have gone right and wrong in our business. And a few people have reached out from that and just saying, "Hey, I want to be involved in this from a funding standpoint. I've got a little extra capital." So I had a call earlier in yesterday, and then I've got a call tomorrow for people just reaching out to me just based on my track record and the things that I'm, sharing. And I could get better at creating, social media to find those outside connections of people that I don't know personally or I'm not involved in a group. So that's something we want to start doing as well.
What is your strategy gonna be behind that? Because the guy I have on, actually, I have 2 podcasts I'm recording today. He's a big social media dude. And so what is the reasoning behind why you wanna do that? I guess you mentioned you wanna reach outside people, but social media.
Same thing, track record, get your name out there, show the things that you're doing, talk about land investing in general, maybe getting more people interested in it. And then using that to paint a wide brush across a lot of people that could see these things and be interested in the future. You never know. In 2 years, I could be starting my own mentorship program under a land flipping thing. So I think just getting the ground roots started today, not only for the funding aspect and people learning, I'm working with a wholesaler that found me through one of our online ads and something where he doesn't have the funds to get started, but he's just going to leverage my experience and hopefully him and I can find something. But he's out there bird dogging, doing the cold calling, doing his cold outreach, and then he'll partner with me on a deal. Never met him in my life. I've only spoken to him on the phone. We're just going off of kind of a handshake situation, but just those things alone, just that's just an online ad that I run through a PPC marketing that he found me, and he had called in 3 or 4 times. So I said, okay, this guy's obviously pretty eager to get started. So just having a presence out there, I think will open a lot more doors.
What does that ad look like?
So it's a PPC ad. It's basically they create a landing page for you and it's for sellers or owners of properties to come on and drop some information on a landing page that will allow you to call them, speak about the property, and then you can do your due diligence in the background. So it's just a PBC. One of the three things as you go down Google, sell my land fast, my ad should show up in that ad.
Okay, so you're running land ads.
Correct.
Okay, cool. I haven't heard of anybody doing PPC for land yet, so that's a new one.
Let's keep that on the hush hush. There's a few people now in the pod that comes from the pod too. Landon started it, Dylan started it, and I started it, and we heard it on a podcast. So we're just all learning from each other and really pushing each other to try new things.
So this is the thing. This is what I was talking with Justin Mosley about this at the Action Academy Atlanta meetup the other day. How long do you think land flipping has until it becomes wholesaling? Until
That's a great question.
people are hearing about this, seeing the profits, and they're like, and then you have that pile on that we had with wholesaling in 2020, 2021.
I think it's going to be a few years. The people that started in 2020 now are doing very well in land, seven figure years that they're having at this point. So they just have 2 to 3 years of experience, and that was pre-saturation. So now that it's a little bit more popular, I think it's going to come down to your processes, your callbacks, everything that go into running a business. If you have that really fine tuned, which we're still working on today, I think you'll be able to separate yourself from the herd very quickly. But they do almost every person you get on the phone with has heard from another land investor at some point, either through a letter, text message, or any other outbound kind of a cold call, one of those things. So you're having to overcome that, and you're having to tell your story a little bit better. So if you can separate yourself and you can tell your story, describe the process, come off very knowledgeable, I think you'll set yourself above those. And then when it does get to a saturation point, you'll have all those pieces in place to rise above the rest.
That's a great point. If you start now, you're going to be in a better position, at least to pivot in the future. Like if you start making
Correct.
money on it today and it starts to become, I think every single strategy of purchasing and making profit on real estate sunsets, like buying flips off the MLS sunsetted.
Mhm.
It's not really realistic right now. And there's other people that'll say it is. They kept doing it and they're just kicking people in the nuts, giving lowball offers every day, and they're getting houses that way.
Sure.
Wholesaling. I remember when wholesaling was the thing. Like people were like, "Oh, I made a 50,000, 100,000." My business partner made a $2 million assignment fee on an
That's
apartment
incredible.
complex. It's insane. But it's not that that's over, but it's way harder now. And so I think if you establish those baselines of, "Hey, I'm good at this. I'm good at this. I'm good at this," and you stick to those, you can always pivot and change how you're getting leads or how you're marketing or whatever to continue being good at what you do.
You could switch right into another asset class. I could take everything that I'm doing today and switch to self-storage. And I don't know a lot of people that are doing that today. So I learned that asset class, which wouldn't be that difficult with my background, multifamily, a lot of the synergies there, vacancies, all the things that go into a P&L for a self-storage. But if I was to pivot into that asset class or short-term rentals or something like that, I think I could pick up properties that way. Having that skill set and that business built could allow you to pivot like you were saying.
I remember what I was going to ask you now. I want to talk about shiny object syndrome. I learned about land flipping the first time with a guy named Jack Bosch. And this was in a conference that I was at in Houston, Texas, I think in 2022. Theoretically, if I had heard what Jack said, and I heard what he said loud and clear because I was taking pages and pages of notes. And I was like, huh, this is interesting, but I don't know anything about land. So I didn't do anything about it. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. His course is $10,000. So that's at that time, that was completely a question that I would spend that much money on educating myself. And so I look back on that and I only imagine what life would have looked like if I had been like, oh, this land flipping thing, like he's making $30,000 a week from Europe. Like the guy flew in from Europe. He lives in Europe, but he makes money here. And if I had done that, I would probably be a deca-millionaire by now and, like, sitting on my yacht, but the thing is, I wanted to do houses, like, that was my thing, and I didn't wanna get distracted because there was so much information. There was also a guy about buying businesses there, a Bitcoin guy. There were so many people I could learn how to make money. So, you're in land flipping right now, and I think it's a temptation for a lot of people when they see these profits you guys are making, but they don't see the hours you put in to learn all the things about land that are specific. So that was a word bomb, but like, how do you avoid shiny object syndrome in your opinion? And then B, like, should people maybe start focusing on land flipping and start looking into this? And maybe it's not a shiny object.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's ironic that you say Jack Bosch was the person that you heard about it first, because that was my podcast. And I couldn't think of his name when I was, talking about that first podcast that I heard. So that's Jack Bosch taught me, or that's the first thing. And then I went into a spiral through his podcast that he had. Yeah, as far as shiny object goes, I don't know. I think and you can get shiny object within land flipping alone too. You can go from buying land, selling it as a traditional flip. You can go into entitlements, subdivides. So you really have to, in my opinion, you have to not master, but really get really good at one thing at a time. So in that case, right now I'm focusing on land flipping. Now I'm going to take that land flipping and then start doing double closing. Now I'm going to take that and listing them on the market prior to ownership. And with the proper documentation in place, I should say that. But each step and each thing that I learn within land flipping, I'm going to slowly transition into the next big thing that has that shiny object kind of feeling to it now. But I know if I listen to a podcast and I switch over to entitlement, my land flipping, more of my crux of my business will suffer. So I don't know how to avoid it. It's very hard when you're first getting started out. And I did hear a few people say this recently is you should try and dabble in a little bit of everything and really find where your passion is. I think that was Ben Call that did mention that on his posts online, where you should really dabble in the beginning, because Action Academy truly is the epitome of shiny object. You get into it and you see all these different asset classes, land flipping, self storage, mobile home parks, and you're like, I can do all of those things, but you can't do them all at once. So really just getting into one thing that really piques your interest and something that you're already capitalized for, or you know how to get the capital to begin that. If you go into something like a multifamily, you're going to have a large down payment and maybe something you can't start out doing today, but maybe land flipping is where, that multifamily is where you want to be, and the vehicle to get there is land flipping. So maybe a combination of two things. And that's what I hope to do in the future. But I always want to have this land flipping thing on the side. But I think it doesn't hurt to get involved in a few things, or at least learn those things and find your passion.
I love all of that. And this kind of leads, we're going to start winding down here for the episode, but I want to ask this question. If you could give a piece of advice to someone that feels like they have no resources, what would you say they should do to get started in their entrepreneurial journey?
For me, is podcast. I think that it's free. It's very educational. There's a lot of subjects out there. If you're not in real estate, you could be in any type of podcast out there. There's probably millions at this point. You can listen to Hayden on the Art of Connection and find a way to connect people and figure out a monetary system for that. And especially everything from bigger pockets all the way to a land investing podcast. So for me, it would be just education. To this day, I get an alert a lot of times at 6:30 in the morning, and I take a walk at that time period, either with my daughter or by myself, and podcasts seem to be dropping around that time. So I'm gonna get excited when a new one comes out because I have nothing left to listen to.
Mm.
So to this day, I'm still trying to educate myself and learn everything I can about land flipping. And then as I transition into a larger asset, I'm going to dive back into that again. So really I think that's the best way for me to learn, is just to indulge myself in whatever I'm interested in. And then I can start taking those actions. But I wouldn't wait too long either. You can get overwhelmed with that. Everybody says analysis by paralysis, but start taking some of those steps, reaching out to those potential mentors, reaching out to groups that other people are in. There's a lot of free programs out there. I know for land flipping, there's Pete Reese has Land Conquest, and you can just get into around other like-minded people and start asking those basic questions, and then figuring out how to send that first piece of mail. It's all available. You just got to go out and find it.
Yeah. And then I love the advice. I would echo this is just reach out to the people that host the podcasts, follow them on Instagram, follow them on the social medias, engage with those people because those are the people that are connected to the people that you need to know. And if you just share with them, hey, I'm really interested in this. I'm not just kicking tires. I'm taking this action. Ask them a very pointed, specific question or give them very pointed, specific feedback or gratitude. And they will, I'm not going to say always, but most of the time, from what I've seen, even if somebody has hundreds of thousands of followers, they or their team check their DMs and they're always looking out for stuff like that to share with the person who runs the social media account. So if you're praising somebody about how good their podcast is and you give very specific points about what you learned and why it was helpful, there's a pretty high likelihood that that person will at least see it. And I would say there's probably a higher likelihood than you would think that they'll respond to it.
Yeah, totally agree.
I texted Brian the other day and I was like, dude, I just want to tell you I'm thankful for you, man. You changed my life. I was like, I know you probably hear it all the time. He's like, dude, I don't hear it all the time because everyone thinks I hear it all the time. And so you can create a strong relationship with people saying something that you think they probably hear all the time that they probably don't.
Yeah. And then I found this, and this was actually Jake's idea, is when we have those people on, or you reach out to them and they respond and they give you some advice, always follow back up, like you were saying, and just give them a thank you. Say, this was so helpful. I know you're busy. I know you're doing a lot of things, but that thank you sometimes opened that door a little bit further. And somebody was, I did that recently, and it was Jake's idea. So I got to give him credit for it. But, he was very honored to say, "Hey, most people don't do that." So that was a cool response that I got in return. And I had to vent to this gentleman who had a lot more experience than me. And I said, "I'm getting stuck in these deals. I don't think they're good. Am I doing the right thing? Should I try it? Should I pivot?" And he was just my sounding board and told me, "No, that's what everybody's going through." And then I followed up and I thanked him, and he was very honored that I did that. So that was pretty neat.
Love that. And then this is going to be the last question I'll ask you, and then we'll wrap it up. Is there a connection that you can think of? And I know this is off the cuff. I should have told you in the beginning of the episode, but is there a connection that you can think of that really changed the trajectory of where you were going? This could be to a person or a group.
I'd have to default, and it's an easy answer, but it is 100% where my heart would go to would be Action Academy. It's an easy answer because I'm in it now and I'm living and breathing it, but it has really changed my thought process, the trajectory, everything how my business operates today. I'm just being around those like-minded people. And I knew I needed it by listening to Brian on that first podcast. And I took that initial outreach step and had the call. And ever since then, I haven't looked back, and it's been pretty amazing. And just, we're really grown together and excited for the future.
It's crazy. It's a weird feeling. Like it
It
sounds,
is.
my podcast is an advertisement for Action Academy because we're both in it. But like, it is an insane thing to be able to be in a group of people, of 300 people that are all pushing the ball towards the same goal of freedom. And it's such an amazing place to be and to get to be around people that are like-minded. So I can't agree more with you on that because we have that common out. But Brian, thanks so much for coming on, my man. Where can people find you? You mentioned you're going to get that social media fired on up.
Yeah.
Where can people follow along with you when you're getting that off the ground?
Yeah, right now, any email, I could just give an email and a website. Both of those is probably the best way. I don't have a huge presence today as far as social media goes. It's, like I said, something we want to work on, but patriotplots.com is the name of our website. And then Brian at patriotplots.com is where you can reach me directly.
I love it, man. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.